Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent.
In recent days, Donald Trump's spinners have worked hard to build up images of his political invincibility. They've pointed to his formidable fundraising in the wake of his criminal conviction and have highlighted a series of doctored videos of President Biden that are deceptively designed to portray him as so old and feeble that he can't possibly win re-election. But what if a lot of this is smoke and mirrors? In an important new piece, Politico reports that behind the scenes, a good deal of Republicans are suddenly not feeling too sure of either Trump's chances or their own chances down ballot with him at the top of the ticket. Today we're chatting about this with Mona Charen, Never Trump conservative and editor and columnist at The Bulwark, who has written shrewdly about the tendency of Republicans to overestimate Biden's weaknesses on age. This may be something even some Republicans are now realizing. Great to have you on, Mona.
Good to be with you, Greg. The last time you and I were in close collaboration, it was about the Electoral Reform Act. So that was the Electoral Count Reform Act, I should say, which was really, really important. And it was a pleasure to be in the foxhole with you.
Yes, I was really glad to have you there, too. And it ended well. I believe we did a podcast, right? We had a discussion about it. That was before the Senate voted, or I don't remember exactly how that played out. But in the end, they passed it by a wide bipartisan margin.
Yeah, so it's important to remember as we're all feeling anxious, and this is a very fraught year, but sometimes things go well.
They don't always win. So this Politico report is really something. It says that while Trump's fundraising is picking up in a big way thanks to his criminal conviction, the mood of Republicans across the country has dimmed amid ongoing concerns about the effect of abortion on GOP candidates, the defection from Trump among GOP voters in primaries, and new polling that shows Trump's conviction is hurting him with independents. That's not the picture we're getting publicly from Trump and Republicans, is it, Mona?
Well, no, but I found this Politico report a little puzzling in the sense that it was saying, it was presenting it as if, well, up until now, Republicans have been super confident, but now certain cracks are appearing. I mean, throughout this entire process, it has been unbelievably tight. The polls have been within the margin of error. Everybody has known that that's the case. We've all been reduced to hoping that people who pay very little attention to politics will, when they finally focus, recognize the stakes of this election and then, do the right thing. But that much having been said, I do think it's worth dwelling on a few things because, so for example, you mentioned the fundraising boost that Trump got after his criminal conviction. That should not surprise anybody. we know that we are dealing with a cult that has been so brainwashed into believing that that Trump is their savior and that he is the victim of malign forces. That yes, some small dollar people are going to kick in. They're going to support him in the face of a criminal conviction, which they regard as illegitimate. And so that's not surprising. But what's less welcome to the Trump forces is that there is polling suggesting that among independents and among people who don't pay close attention, again, there's some overlap in those two groups, not total, that the conviction actually hurt him, and they know that.
I don't think we've collectively wrapped our heads around what it means that right now meaningful percentages of GOP primary voters have opposed Trump in state after state. Now, people will always object to that and say something like, oh, LOL, Republicans are totally in lockstep with Trump. What are you talking about? They'll never desert him. But since 2020, some things have happened, right? We saw them. We had the violent effort to overturn the election. We had Trump getting indicted for that and for stealing state secrets. We have Trump not only being unrepentant for January 6th, but also promising to pardon the rioters. And now Trump getting criminally convicted by a jury of his peers. So, like I said, you're a never Trumper, so you might have your finger on this pulse. How authentically felt is this kind of mini rebellion against Trump among Republican voters? How deep does it run?
Yeah, I do think that there is a persistent thread of Republicans who have stayed angry about what has happened to their party, the populist, revolution that has dramatically changed what the whole Republican Party is. Even before January 6th, there were a significant number of Republican voters, like we don't know, of course, secret ballot, but Republican areas, like suburban areas, that went for Biden that would traditionally never have gone for a Democrat. These were those disaffected Republicans who were expressing their dismay about what the Republican Party has become. In 2022, you saw not just the importance of the abortion issue in bringing out Democratic voters, but you also saw a rebellion among Republicans against the crazy candidates that the Republican Party was putting up. You know, the people, the Doug Mastrianos in Pennsylvania and the Carrie Lakes in Arizona, et cetera. Katie Hobbs was not a very strong candidate in Arizona. She really wasn't. But Carrie Lake was so crazy that there was a defection among Republicans, and these voters, I keep saying that Biden should be courting them more because they are critical to the outcome in 2024 as well. And so I mentioned that this thread was visible even before January 6th. Post January 6th, what you hear in focus groups of voters, some of whom voted for Trump, is that was a red line for me. Cannot do that. And so, how many are they? We don't know for sure. But is it an anchor that's weighing down Republicans and Trump, particularly? No question about it.
Absolutely. And of course, the conviction on top of that. I do think that there does seem to be a genuine anti-MAGA strain in the Republican Party. I don't know how big it is, and none of us does, and it'll be critical. I want to switch to a point you made recently, that Trump and his allies vastly oversold Biden's vulnerabilities on the age question. Now, of course, Biden's age is a huge issue. No denying that, right? And it could cost them the election. But now Republicans seem to be uncertain about how easy Biden will be to beat. After all, I want to flag another element of this idea that Trump doesn't allow for any admission that he is at all politically weak or that his opponents might be tougher to defeat than he allows. It's always, Trump is leading by huge amounts in the polls. Even Fox News polls that don't find him up bigly are trash. There's no possibility he can lose in a legitimate election. He always wields absolute mastery over his enemies. That kind of that storyline, I really wonder whether this need to maintain these illusions of invincibility contributes to what you were talking about there, this overestimation of Biden's vulnerabilities. What do you think?
So Trump bounces around. He says contradictory things all the time. And, one of the things that supposedly stayed Jack Smith's hand in not bringing incitement charges against Trump, for example, for his speech on the ellipse on January 6th, was that Trump always manages to say, you have to have strength. You can't have a country if you don't have strength, but peacefully, And so because he talks out of both sides of his mouth in these situations, it would have been hard to bring a case of incitement. Okay. So that's established. He always talks out of both sides of his mouth. And so he will say, I'm invincible. I am, it's not even close. I'm winning by a landslide. And then in the next moment, he'll say, I don't know, it could be pretty tough. We'll see. Who knows what will happen, And so, but here's the point I was making. But the majority of Trump's message, I should be clear, is that Biden is infirm and drooling. Okay.
Right. A total disaster, right? Imploding disaster. And
it has been completely saturating right-wing media outlets. So they're on TikTok and on all the social media, all of the right-wing sites, you see nothing but videos of Biden stumbling. Now, as you said, and I will echo this, Biden does seem a whole lot older than he did 4 years ago. His walk, the fact that he is so stiff, he really seems very old physically.
No question.
Mentally, no, though, even though he stumbles over his words a bit, mentally he is still very much all there. And they have so oversold this idea that he is really not in control, that he is some sort of puppet who is being controlled by others, that he is so doddering and so senile that he cannot do the job. And when Biden has a good moment, as he did at the State of the Union, well, he has had many, in my opinion. I mean, one of the reasons I'm so sure that this is propaganda that's gotten out of hand by the Republicans is I've watched Biden. I watched him make that international trip to Kyiv, and which is hard on anybody's body, far less an 80-year-old or 79, whatever he was at the time. The trip to Jerusalem, where he, traveled 7,000 miles and then gave great speeches, 2 of them. His State of the Union address. So when he rises to the occasion and he is very clear and in command, then they switch tactics and begin saying, well, he was drugged, so we have to have drug tests before the debates. Ronnie Jackson goes on. Ronnie Jackson, the fact that this man is a member of Congress and goes on the air and says that there's some kind of magic elixir that they're going to inject into the, and of course, because they're so classy, they say he's going to get a shot in the butt. That is, Biden will, before the debate, that will magically eliminate his dementia for 90 minutes. If there were such a drug, it would be flying off the shelves.
Yeah, absolutely. Trump himself actually has gone down this road now. I think he said Biden's going to be jacked up on something.
Oh, yes, Trump is definitely doing this. And by the way, Trump himself is so diminished from what he was just a few years ago. Now he began from a much lower place because he's never been particularly coherent. But now he, there was that meeting of the Business Roundtable where he was meeting with CEOs and attempting to be, the presentable Trump, the Trump who can speak to business leaders and impress them. And he he was not finishing his sentences. He was rambling off on these crazy asides, and they emerged from that meeting, surprised. I don't know why they would be surprised if anybody's been paying attention, but apparently they came away dismayed by his lack of coherence.
Yeah, I think that whole story is overblown about billionaires going to Trump. My sense is that we're not really sure what's going on in the corporate suites on a lot of this stuff. I think that this is, again, about their effort to project an aura of invincibility.
Yep. And there are a few, like David Sachs, who's the sidekick to Elon Musk, and so he's a big Trump guy, also a big Russia guy, so that makes sense. But so he's in Trump's camp, and of course Elon Musk is sort of in Trump's camp, but it's not like everybody in the corporate or elite business world is backing Trump. That you're right. That's not true.
Yeah. About something you said earlier about the vulnerability of MAGA, Republicans are suddenly realizing that their down ballot problems are real, per this Politico report. In that special election in Ohio recently, the Dem candidate lost, but enormously cut into Trump's margin there, including in Mahoning, which is really Trump country. Or I should say it's really, the type of place that swung to Trump after Obama. Dem senators in places like Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Wisconsin are leading in polls. And in Arizona's open Senate contest, Kari Lake, as you mentioned earlier, is doing pretty poorly. Is there a twofer going on here where Republicans are realizing that, number one, abortion is continuing to hurt them, and number two, that MAGA remains a major liability? I mean, Lake is a MAGA superstar, and she's ailing. So is it possible, or is this overly optimistic? Is it possible Republicans are seeing that treating Trump's coup as a good thing and treating Trump as if he's personally above the law, those things aren't necessarily electoral winners?
Well, I view it this way. When you see in a number of states that Democrats are polling 5, 6, 7 points ahead of Biden, and doing quite well, even in particular in swing states, what that says to me is that the Democratic brand remains popular, and the only issue is people are so petrified about Biden's age. And so, and of course, well, I shouldn't say just that, because inflation is also
absolutely
hurting him.
Yeah.
But so inflation, immigration, and age, those three things are dragging Biden down. And he attempted to repair the immigration thing, but I think it's kind of, that ship has sailed. That's going to be a liability for him, no matter what he does between now and November.
The question is how much of one. I mean,
how much exactly?
I think a key thing to remember, if I could just throw this out there, since we're talking about Kari Lake, we were told that immigration was a huge vulnerability in 22 also, and I admit that it's got worse for him now, but there were major border crises happening that year. It was clear that there were some serious problems at the border, and you had virtually every one of the major statewide MAGA candidates who made immigration absolutely central went down to defeat. You had Blake Masters lose in Arizona, Lake, and I think Adam Laxalt, who was a very big border, quote-unquote, hawk, who also lost his race. I just to be clear, I think immigration is a vulnerability for Biden and Democrats. I just don't know how much of one it is. It seems to never quite be the silver bullet Republicans need. They spend hundreds of millions each cycle, right?
Yeah, that's completely fair. I would say, though, that in 2024, the reason it's hurting him as much as it is that it plays into a story. And the story is that Biden is weak and he doesn't control our border, nor is the international situation under control. There are wars happening on his watch. Crime is out of control. By the way, crime has come down, way down from where it was under Trump. and inflation. And so that's the story that they're trying to weave together. And unfortunately, they've had some success with that narrative that Biden's just not in command. And so that's the issue on immigration, not so much immigration per se, but the perception of chaos that people want a president to prevent.
So let's try to wrap this up. Is the big story here something like the following? Biden's age, major vulnerability, clear perceptions, as you say, that he's not in control. I think there's no doubt about that. That's 100% right. On the other hand, a bunch of the main Republican arguments are kind of evaporating, right? He's not a completely doddering, senile, entirely diminished figure, right? So that's kind of going away.
He's actually mentally, he's fine.
Right, mentally he's
fine. I'm nervous about the debate, but I am confident that the Biden who was at the State of the Union will show up at the debate.
Yes, but that just means that he's going to be jacked up the same way that he was at the debate. Mona, you know that. You know how MAGA works.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Okay, so that story is evaporating. Inflation, look, still a big problem, but maybe not what it was. And I think maybe we're seeing perceptions of the economy improve. People are feeling better. Yes. Crime, the Trump crime wave of 2020 is gone.
Right.
So, and with immigration, still a big vulnerability, maybe not quite as much a one now because they did just roll out this big border policy, major spending on border security. Trump commanded Republicans to kill it, right? And now Biden has tightened up asylum accessibility. So is the story maybe that some of these big arguments are disappearing?
On immigration, I don't think he handled it that well because if he was going to make changes in immigration law, first of all, he should have announced it together. He made two changes. One was that he was going to tighten up the requirements for asking for asylum, which desperately needs to be done and was part of that package that the Republicans rejected in Congress. But nevertheless, he did that with one hand. And then with the other hand, he made it easier for the spouses of citizens who are here, who are not legal, to normalize their status. So he did those two things at once, as if to say, with the one hand, I'm being tougher on immigration enforcement, tightening up the rules on asylum. With the other hand, I'm being looser by making it easier for the spouses to regularize their status. So in the end, I don't think he sent a message that's clear to voters about where he stands. I'm very pro-immigration personally, but let's face it, at the moment, the Republicans have done so much damage in persuading people that there's that we're being overrun. I mean, people believe all these things, that illegal immigrants are pouring across the border and coming here and getting their own apartments and health care and subsidies, all of which is not true. But anyway, it doesn't change the fact, even though there are a lot of lies out there, it doesn't change the fact that it is a liability for him. But let me just, before we close, I want to say what I think Biden needs to do and hasn't done sufficiently yet. And that is, he absolutely has to extend himself to the 40 former members of Trump's cabinet who are not supporting him for re-election. He needs to call John Kelly and invite him to the White House and talk to him and have John Kelly appear with Biden and talk about why he can't support Trump. He needs to have all of these figures from the Trump camp. These are people Trump hired who say he is unfit to serve another term. And I don't understand why he hasn't done it yet. But it's crying out to be done, and only Biden can do that.
I've got to think that's in the works in some way or other. I mean, they're clearly courting those voters, and I agree. That's one big way to get them. I mean, people take their cues from elites. The types of voters we're talking about here are non-MAGA. They're in the kind of camp that we discussed earlier, this maybe Republican-leaning independents, moderate Republicans, not Trumpy.
Exactly.
They may still not want to vote for a Democrat. They may think Biden's terrible and so forth. But if they hear from enough people around Trump that he is an absolute catastrophe for the country if he's reelected, then I think maybe they can get to yes on Biden.
And even if they don't get to yes on Biden, if they stay home, that's half a point right there.
Absolutely. Well, Mona Charan, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate the insights.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Everybody, please make sure to check out some good new pieces up at TNR.com. Genevieve Gunther, breaking down the new climate denial and offering an anatomy of what makes it tick, and Susan Milligan, arguing that reports of Biden's Black and Hispanic problem are hugely overstated. We'll see you all tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.